Welcome to the Theology of Love. I'm your host, Tad Inoue. Today we're looking at Numbers chapters 23 and 24. At this point in the story, Israel is camped in the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. They're at the turning point in the wilderness journey, standing on the edge of the promised land. Balak, the king of Moab, sees how numerous Israel is. He sees what has happened around them and becomes afraid that Israel may directly attack Moab in this scene. His fear sets everything else in motion. So he brings in Balaam, a known seer, to curse Israel. And if you've been with me in the previous chapter, you already know the donkey episode has humbled Balaam a bit. The story has already shown us that his powers are not as complete as he thinks they are. So by the time we arrive in chapters 23 and 24, we're not just watching a king and a diviner. We're watching fear try to interfere with a future God has already set in motion. What stands out to me right away is how much effort Balak puts into trying to alter the outcome. He doesn't make one attempt and then stop. He keeps trying and then relocates and tries again. He repeats the sacrificial setup at each different location in Numbers 23, 1 and 2, and again in 23, 14, and then again in 23, 29 through 30. He builds 7 altars and offers a bull and a ram on each of the altars. That isn't a casual thing. That's a serious endeavor and expensive. And I think the chapter wants us to feel that seriousness. Balak isn't calm. He's just exploring options. He's quite afraid. He's trying to stop something he thinks is coming. Then the center of the whole chapter starts to come into focus. Balaam says in Numbers 23:8, "How can I curse whom God has not cursed? How can I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced?" Then a little later in Numbers 23:20, he says, "I have received a command to bless. He has blessed and I cannot reverse it." Those two lines sit at the center of everything that is happening in these chapters. The first one gives us the question. The second one gives us the conclusion. Balak can want a different result and try everything in his power to change it, but the answer remains the same. He has blessed, and I cannot reverse it. That matters because it tells us what this chapter is really about. I think they are mainly about the providence of God, the will of God, the unalterable nature of God's promises to Israel as they stand on the edge of the promised land. And I want to be careful here. I'm not just saying God is truthful in some vague, abstract sense. I'm saying the story is presenting God as committed to what God has already spoken and set into motion. Numbers 23:19 supports this when Balaam says, "God is not a man. That he should lie or change his mind." In this scene, that doesn't feel like a detached theological slogan. It feels like an explanation for why Balak's repeated attempts cannot change the answer. And this is where Balaam becomes really important. He isn't just some random man the king found on the side of the road. He is supposed to matter. Balak brings him in because he's a known seer, a diviner, someone whose words are thought to carry real spiritual weight. So when Balaam cannot produce the curse, the point lands harder. The story is not saying that nobody failed at this. It's saying that even a spiritually renowned seer cannot overturn what God has blessed. That becomes even more interesting when we slow down and look at archaeologically for a moment. At Deir, ʿAlla, in modern Jordan, archaeologists found an inscription that refers to Balaam, son of Beor, a seer of the gods. Carl S. Ehrlich points out that this does not prove the whole biblical story exactly as written, but it does show that Balaam was remembered outside of the Bible as a real seer figure in ancient Near East. And that exact phrase matters. It says seer of the gods, not seer of the God of Israel. That places Balaam in a wider non-Israelite religious world. So Numbers is not denying Balaam's spiritual significance. It's subordinating it to the Lord's authority. Even a famous non-Israelite seer from a world of other gods and other spiritual systems cannot speak against what the Lord has blessed. This is one of the strongest parts of the chapter. The text doesn't say that other spiritual leaders have no weight. It is really saying that there's no spiritual power greater than God. Balaam's renown actually strengthens this point, and I think that may be part of the reason why the text keeps him a little ambiguous. He clearly has real spiritual reputation and speaks real oracles, but he's also compromised. Rabbinic tradition speaks to this. Rashi often reads Balaam as greedy and proud in a larger Balaam story, and yet Rashi also makes it clear in these chapters that Balaam cannot nullify a blessing already given by God. So Balaam becomes both a warning and an unwilling witness. To God, God can use even a compromised voice to speak the truth. This is also where I think it helps to notice the difference between modern academic readers and rabbinic readers. Modern scholars sometimes describe these chapters in terms of literary layers. Tikva, Friar Kinsky argued that the Balaam story, as we have it, uses earlier poetic sources, especially parts of the Balaam prophecies inside the larger narrative composition. Alexander Ruffy's work on Balaam also treats the Balaam material as layered and historically complex. That helps explain why the speeches in Numbers 23 and 24 feel elevated, dense, and a little different from the prose around them. The rabbis usually aren't asking whether the poems are older than the prose, but in practice, they often do something similar. Because they spend most of their interpretive energy on Balaam's speeches themselves, Rashi doesn't stop to give you source criticism, but he does treat the oracles as the place where the decisive truth is spoken. I think that comparison is worth noticing and then letting people sit with it. Modern scholars may say the poetry is older theological material woven into a later frame. Rabbinic readers may not use that language, but they still lean into the speeches because that is where the chapter says most clearly what cannot be changed. And when we stay with the narrative, the repetition becomes part of the message. Balak keeps trying to change the conditions of the result. In Numbers 23:13, he says, "Come with me to another place." And then later in 23:27, he says it again. He keeps moving Balaam from place to place as though a new location, another ritual setup, another vantage point might finally produce the curse he wants. But nothing changes. This is why, quote, "I cannot reverse it," really does feel like the center of the chapter. Not only because Balaam says it, but because every failed attempt around it proves it. All Balaam's efforts do not change the results. Rashi is helpful here too. On Numbers 23:19 through 20, he takes Balaam to mean that God has already declared Israel blessed and that Balaam cannot nullify that blessing. Then in Numbers 24:1, when the text says Balaam saw that it pleased the Lord to bless Israel and did not go, as before, to seek omens, that feels like a quiet turning point. Balaam is slowly relearning submission. He isn't the main point of the chapter, but he matters because he is a seer who has to be reminded that he cannot use his status, his skill, or his access to get around the will of God. And because he matters as a seer, his limit becomes the chapter's lesson. If even Balaam cannot reverse what God has blessed, then no one else in the story can either. Then, by chapter 24, the chapter widens. Balaam is no longer just failing to curse Israel. He becomes the unwilling mouthpiece of Israel's future. That's where Numbers 24:17 matters so much. Quote, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star will come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. I don't think the main point there is to get lost in the speculation. I think the main point is that Balaam is now speaking beyond the immediate moment into Israel's future destiny. God has a future for them, and nobody in this scene can alter it. Even Balaam is speaking it. And this is where I think we need to slow down and notice why Moab matters. Readers may not automatically understand the importance of it, but Balaam is not speaking into thin air. He is speaking to Balak, king of Moab, and the oracle goes on to speak directly about Moab. That keeps the prophecy tied to Balak's fear and his world. This isn't just abstract future language. It turns back towards the very world Balak is trying to protect. This is one reason Jewish interpreters like Ibn Ezra connect Numbers 24:17 first to David. Ibn Ezra explicitly says the prophecy refers to King David, and Moab connection helps make sense of that because 2 Samuel 8:2 later describes David defeating Moab. So I think it's fair to say the verse points to Israel's future destiny, with a future ruler likely part of that picture, probably David in the near historical sense, even though later tradition also hears wider messianic echoes in it. That means by the end of these chapters, Balak's future has become almost complete. The very seer he hired to stop Israel becomes the one announcing that Israel's future will come. That irony is strong. Balak's project collapses from within because the very tool he chose to curse becomes the witness against his plan. And I think that's one of the reasons the story stays with people. It's not just that the curse doesn't work, it's that the attempt to stop God's promise gets taken over and turned into a public reaffirmation of that promise in front of Balak and Moab. Balaam's oracles don't create God's promises. They publicly proclaim them. For me, Numbers 23 and 24 right now are chapters that show us the futility of trying to alter what God has blessed and ordained for Israel as they stand on the edge of the promised land. Balak is afraid, and fear drives him into repeated attempts to intervene. Balaam is significant, and that significance makes his limitations meaningful. The rituals are costly, repeated, and serious, but they cannot purchase a different answer. The locations change, but the truth does not. And at the center of it all sits that one line: He has blessed, and I cannot reverse it. To me, that's the heart of the chapter. I think this story is saying something much deeper than Israel survives a threat. I think it says God's will and intentions supersede humankind's attempts to overturn them. God's promises continue unchanged, and the one hired to obstruct that future ends up announcing it directly. That is a powerful thing to sit with, and I think it is one of the reasons these chapters still matter. They are not just about Balaam or Balak. They are about a God whose covenant cannot be bought off, relocated, pressured, or revoked. Thank you for joining me for another deep dive into Scripture. This is a place where we explore Scripture honestly, think more deeply, and critically so that we can let Scripture speak to us authentically as possible. Thanks again for listening. I love you all. Please let me know what you think in the comments. I'm always interested in your point of view. Give us a like. It means so much to me. Thanks again, and peace and love with you all. I will see you in the next chapter soon.